Okay, well, Angeli, and for those of you who don't know Adam is a political consultant. He's the founder and president of Rescue Michigan Coalition. It's a grassroots leadership organization dedicated to defending and restoring the constitutional rights of Michigan's citizens. I really like the sound of that. Adam began politics as a technology director for the Ron Paul 2008 presidential campaign and Ron Paul's Campaign for Liberty, returning to Ron Paul in 2012 as his Michigan coordinator, and in 2013, Adam became a legislative assistant for Congressman Kerry Bentolio. And I know there's ladies in this room who worked for Kerry, and Pat's table there, I know there's a few ladies there, yeah, and we're really backing Kerry Bentolio. So he worked for Kerry on the Hill before returning to Michigan as a freelance consultant. And he ran a successful campaign for Gary Glenn, who's out of the Midland, Michigan area, John Riley, who a lot of us know in this room from the Rochester area, Jeff Noble for state rep, and he worked for Representative Riley as a legislative director for more than 3 years. And now he's full-time organizing the grassroots in Michigan with his Rescue Michigan Coalition. For those of you who haven't had a chance to see Adam's weekly podcast, and I'll have him give you a little more information about that, you're really missing out. It's great. And he records those, so you can always watch them later too, because it's something you come on late at night a lot of times at 10 o'clock or something.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Between 8 and 10 sometimes.
Yeah, 8, 10, 9, something like that. So for us, people who go to bed early, get up early, you know, whatever. But they're recorded, and he can send you an email with a link, and you can watch that because they're really informative. They're really good. He's always over the mark and taking flack. That's when you know you're doing the right thing, when you're taking some flack, right? Okay, so with that, Adam, come on up.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks everybody for having me tonight. I'm going to bring this other mic a little closer. I actually do want to record this in case I do a decent job. So I really want to, by the way, how much time, when do I stop? So I can check my time.
8:15.
8:15?
Yeah, I got tape.
Okay.
I have got tape.
Okay. Very good. All right, so I don't want to spend too much of my limited time here preaching to the choir, because we could all talk, and some of us probably have been talking for the past couple hours about every which way our country is falling apart in ways I never imagined, but I do think I need to at least say a little bit about what motivates me. If you'd asked me 2 years ago what the biggest issues facing Michigan and our country were, election integrity and preventing lockdowns and preventing vaccine mandates coming across the board, wouldn't even cross my mind. And yet, I do recall having some things on my mind back in those days. Liberty wasn't exactly secure even back then. And I am kind of an all-of-the-above guy. I've had the privilege, as Kim kind of mentioned, as a political consultant, to work for people I genuinely like and respect, which is not easy to do in politics because there aren't many of them out there at all. And in fact, most recently, even among those that she mentioned, you know, even the conservatives, even the Tea Party activist types, all face pressures when they get to Washington or Lansing in public office. But most recently, working for John Riley was an absolute pleasure to work for someone who was just absolutely, utterly fearless and did not care what the lobbyists thought, did not care what the opposition said, and would just always vote his conscience every single time. We used to say he and Steve Johnson were the two most conservative in Lansing, and they would kind of compete for that title, although I think that's been put to rest in the last couple of months with Rep. Johnson, who says there's nothing wrong in the election and also has no problem with Facebook censoring people. But so be it. Representative Riley can have that title. But anyway, yeah, my background, going back to Ron Paul, always what I think has motivated me, and I think even going back to childhood, has been just a hatred of tyranny and a hatred of authority figures. You know, people trying to control and diminish us. I actually came from a liberal family, so I was coming at it from the perspective of opposing the evil maniac George Bush when I was in college. But then But the taste for liberty certainly attracted me to Ron Paul, his stance on the foreign policy and monetary policy, the globalism, and then I ended up coming around just about everything else, listening to Dr. Paul speak for the next couple of years. And then, of course, everything that's followed since then, I think, has hopefully wakened up some people, although also in this country, a lot of people have fallen into a deep delusion about what's been going on. I remember back when I was in college, I went to U of M, you know, there's a whole anti-establishment punk community back in those days. And these guys, you know, were supposed to be the big free thinkers of their day, and now they're all the worst brown shirts you can ever imagine. The notion that punk musicians would be endorsing lockdowns and prohibitions on going out to see a show is just mind-boggling, but it illustrates the extent to which our population has been manipulated. And, you know, that's something else that I was thinking back. I was watching, I don't know how much you guys like Norm Macdonald, this great comedian that passed away this past week. He was one of my absolute favorites. I remember him joking on Saturday Night Live, calling Bill Clinton a murderer, which you don't get guys like that much these days. And of course, he actually lost that gig, calling O.J. Simpson a murderer because the NBC executive was his friend. But I remember I was going through all these old Norm Macdonald clips, and he did this one bit where he's talking about how crazy stage hypnosis is. And oh my God, can you imagine he talked to this guy that was convinced he was a chicken? He's like, how can you say that? I remember, it reminded me, when I was a kid too, I remember seeing kids' cartoons, and there's characters like the snake in the Jungle Book who would hypnotize other characters. And I remember being repulsed at that thought, the thought that someone's mind could be taken over. And I think subconsciously I always had that guard against that, you know, the notion that people can just be taken in. And once you get emotionally invested into an idea, it hooks you in deeper and deeper and deeper the farther down you go. That's how cults operate. It comes from manipulation, and then ultimately it is entrenched through self-delusion. And we see this happening with total clarity on the left, and of course they think they see the same thing in us. Although, I should say, we also have to be cautious with everything that we take from people who say they're on our side as well. And one of the things that I think is so important at Rescue Michigan, and a duty that I take so seriously, is always being rigorous in the facts that we report. You know, it's one thing to forward on an email from an article you see to your friends, but when you're sending out a message to millions of people, you got to make sure you've done your homework and you do things really carefully. I don't really want to get into any fights here, but you know, my political mentor, he'd always start his lectures by saying, my goal is to offend everybody in this room tonight. And my goal is not really to offend everybody, but it's going to be probably inevitable. But we did have some grassroots pushback here and there, because we did a good hard look at Mike Lindell's documentary. And by the way, just so you guys know a little bit about my background, I have worked in every aspect of campaigns, from volunteer to senior consultant to treasurer to press guy. I've worked in every aspect of elections. I've been a poll challenger, I've been a poll worker, I've been a campaign manager for the election day operations. And actually, I also have the role of whistleblower. It was about mid-October last year. You may have heard from other people about how the Detroit elections officials were systematically not hiring Republicans to work in Detroit on election day because they were controlling the environment. Well, I managed to slip through the cracks. I actually had to apply to be a Detroit poll worker twice. Once in person, I actually couldn't find anywhere online to submit the application. So I drove my paper application to the Detroit City Clerk's office on Grand Boulevard, dropped it off, never heard back. Then a few weeks later, Marion Sheridan found the secret link where you can go to sign up to be a poll worker. That was never on their website. So I applied there too. Never heard back, but eventually, a couple weeks later, I get a call one morning. And I said, hey, have you taken your poll worker training yet? I said, you've never contacted me. What are you talking about? Oh, there's a Detroit poll worker training tomorrow. So, oh, okay, all right, I'll be there. So I go to the poll worker training, and you know, being Detroit, it starts 45 minutes late. So I'm sitting in my chair, playing with my phone, because what else are you to do? I literally never wear masks, but you had to be here, and I thought it was important enough to compromise. So I'm wearing a big sock over, or it's like a ski mask that was just down over my face, so just sitting there breathing heavily. And it occurs to me, they might say something interesting today. So I hit the record button on my phone. Actually, I downloaded a voice recorder app on my phone. I thought, hey, let's see, I might want to take some notes, right? So I record everything, and they said some very interesting things there that day. And I get home. Now they've told me how to check in on the little online portal there. And I see it has me registered to be an electronic poll book inspector on election day. Well, that wasn't the training I took. I took the training to be a regular ballot inspector. I took the wrong training. So I went back the next day, because I knew they had another training the next day, and took the electronic poll book inspector training. Because what's better than having Detroit poll election officials on tape saying things they're not supposed to be saying? Having 2 tapes. So this became a video we made called Detroit Leaks, which my good friend Shane Trejo, you may know, is the 11th District Chair, runs a writer for Big League Politics. They really broke the story, which of course the Michigan media never did. One of the biggest things that they did, however, was they were telling us we're going to use social distancing rules, abuse social distancing rules to impede poll challengers. And I remember because I ended a little video where I took the highlight reel of the things they were saying. And I tell you, listen to it multiple times when you're making a video. So I remember her saying so clearly, they have to wear masks and they have to stay 6 feet. That's important because they can come behind you. Talking about the poll challengers. That's important because they can come behind your table. But if they don't have 6 feet, they can't come back there. And then she calls on a woman in the audience, yeah. And the girl says, so if they're 6 feet back, they can't actually see. Exactly. Not unless they got really good vision or they brought their binoculars. So, called a lawyer friend of mine who we worked on some important cases of in Michigan, sued the governor over lockdown orders, among other things. He found the Secretary of State's directive where they created that policy, connected the lawyers with some good plaintiffs. Bob Cushman, poll challenger from the Detroit area, Steve Carra, now the Trump-endorsed candidate for the 6th Congressional District in Michigan. So they brought suit against Governor Whitmer, actually Secretary of State Benson, over that policy. And we didn't know what was going to happen in the courtroom. We had gotten replies from the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, saying that they were going to fight it. But lo and behold, on the Wednesday before Election Day, the Secretary of State settled out of court and agreed to give us everything we wanted and to rewrite the directive and get it out to the people saying that you can't use social distancing rules to impede poll challengers. Now, good, we got the court victory. Too bad that didn't actually happen on Election Day. Of course, we all know that poll challengers were impeded wholesale. But the case isn't actually quite over yet. So another funny thing happened another month or so later. A friend of mine, Gina Johnson, she became a friend of mine when I found out about her campaign, ran for State House against Angela Whitwer in Eaton County. Great candidate, wonderful woman, didn't make it unfortunately, but it was a close race. So she asked for a recount. And the day of the recount, she calls me and says, they're impeding poll challengers, they're not letting our poll challengers come in. We got this guy I actually knew, who was wearing a face mask but couldn't wear a shield but not a mask, but they said he couldn't just do that. So I called our lawyers, they called the Secretary of State's lawyers, and they said, no, we're not going to stop them. So now they are representing Gina Johnson in a lawsuit against the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. She got a clever way of filing suit with standing, which is demanding her money back on the recount because they impeded her campaign staff. So that suit is pending, and if indeed it turns out the Secretary of State, according to the court, according to me it's already the truth, but if the court finds that she breached her duty in refusing to allow poll challengers to perform their duties under the law, that's going to probably also trigger contempt of court motion against Jocelyn Benson for the 2020 election. So anyway, these things are still happening, and it's certainly frustrating how slow the court system actually is, and that's, you know, another disgrace with respect to these lockdowns. That an entire branch of government can just go offline. Like that's one thing that intrigued me about the legislature too. When the COVID lockdowns first hit, the legislature started just not to work anymore because they're afraid of catching COVID. It's like, you guys represent state reps, 90,000 people, state senators, 270,000 people, and you think when Michigan is on fire, you can just not do your jobs anymore? It's absolutely mind-boggling. So anyway, I'll get back to Mike Lindell later, but we'll talk about Rescue Michigan. When we first started, I was talking to a few other political people about starting some kind of state organization to really fight the lockdowns and fight the tyranny and everything else that's been going on, and we kicked around a few different ideas. And some people suggested going after the lockdowns might not be a good strategy because maybe the lockdowns will be over in a couple months. Well, That didn't quite pan out as expected, but one of the, they were talking about different things. What's our goal? Is it to get rid of Whitmer? Is it to fix society? Is it to stop the lockdowns? All these different things. I thought, well, I kind of want to do all three of those things, actually. But the big piece that's missing, everywhere is grassroots leadership at the local level. And I'll explain what I mean by that in more detail as we get to talking about Rescue Michigan. We do have, I think, some major policy fights we've been taking on over the last year. Obviously, election integrity is a big thing. Obviously, opposing the lockdowns is another one. And now, of course, most recently supporting bills from Sue Allard for vaccine choice. There's 4471, which is the bill to say an employer can't make you take an experimental drug as a condition of employment, and 4667 to say the government and the schools can't make you take an experimental drug as a condition of enrollment, which is what these vaccines are, by the way. And again, I'm not going to rant for the whole night about the science about the vaccines and them being the least tested and the most adverse reactions and everything else. You guys all know that. And if not, go watch Tucker. Or we all have our favorites. I like American Greatness. Breitbart's pretty good. There's lots of them. But anyway, that's become an issue of ours now too. And every now and then, a little thing kind of pops up. We had a thing come up last week. Someone just reached out to me, said, hey, do you know there's a bill coming up in the House Rules and Competitiveness Committee to grant illegal aliens driver's licenses? Now, for those of you who don't know about the Rules and Competitiveness Committee, this is the fast track committee. The backstory of this was in I think the in the Tom Leonard administration, Kevin Cotter, when he was Speaker of the House in 2015. He created a committee called the Michigan Competitiveness Committee. And that was a fast track committee for legislation. And then when Lee Chatfield came in, he got rid of that committee. He said they also have a trash can committee called the Government Operations Committee. So a lot of legislators do this. They have legislatures do this. They have these committees that are specialty purpose committees. There's a fast track committee and there's a garbage can committee where bills are sent to die. So Chatfield said we'll make the Government Ops Committee do both of those things. And then he created something called the Rules Committee. He said he wanted the state legislature to be more like Congress. And I know, right? And the way it was set up was actually nothing like the way the Rules Committee actually works in Congress. It's mostly about amendments, and this legislature doesn't even do that at all. It was really a second committee just for stopping bills and for waving bills through. And they put in charge of this guy, Brand Iden, who never met a lobbyist he didn't like. And that was the idea, is an extra filter to make sure that only stuff lobbyists want get through. And Wentworth, unfortunately, continued that. Jim Lilly is the chair now. He's also a guy who never met a lobbyist he didn't like. Anyway, so that bill is now called the Rules and Competitiveness Committee. It's the Fast Track Committee and also the Filter Committee. And this bill being sent directly there tells me immediately this is a bill they want to get passed, crammed right through right now. And as an organization, you really don't want to take on too many issues. Like, I'm an all-of-the-above conservative. Many of you also probably are, but members are not. When I was working for Gary Glenn, he was the president of the American Family Association of Michigan, and we did a poll because Gary's big issue with AFA was opposing gay marriage. And so we did a poll to see where the voters in the district were on that issue and on abortion and other issues. Turned out, you would think maybe every pro-life voter is pro-traditional marriage and vice versa. No. They overlap, but there's about a third in each that are not in the other camp. And the more issues a group takes on, the more controversial they are, the more members walk away. Because, you all might be in with me on all the issues I talked about, but not on gun rights, right? I mean, everyone in this room doesn't agree on every issue. So this issue is immigration. I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to take this one on. But as I'm thinking about it, it's not the immigration that's the issue, although it is an issue. The issue to me was, and this is getting to messaging and how to message effectively, these lawmakers, with our state still to this day on fire, still with all the problems that we have, decide after the first thing they're going to do after a 3-month vacation is go to give illegal aliens driver's licenses, which of course also does play into election integrity too. And also, by the way, it's one of the most unpopular issues outside of the Chamber of Commerce. but it shows who they're listening to. So we did a huge email blast about that and told people to sign petitions and send them in. And wouldn't you know, that bill got yanked out of the committee hearing that next day. So the bill has been at least delayed for a couple of weeks. But I do want to talk about what does work and what is effective, because there's so many things I hear from people of frustration towards politics in general, frustration towards sending in petitions, frustration with getting involved in campaigns and doing election work and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of good reasons for people to be frustrated for all of those things. But you have to also understand, frustration is also something the political class wants to convey to people to convince them not to do the things that actually are effective. And one thing you have to always ask yourself, whenever a politician or member of the political class tells you anything, how does it benefit them if I believe them? I'll give you an example, talking about petitions. We did an email blast about this, I think just yesterday. A state senator responded to one of our members' petitions. He says, I don't respond directly to petitions that come from these mass email lists like change.org or any other third-party group. I only respond to handwritten letters. You guys ever heard that from politicians? It's better to send a handwritten letter than a form letter. You've heard that one before? How does it benefit them if you believe that? First of all, most people won't send those letters then, because they don't have the time to write them. They don't have the self-confidence to write them. And maybe don't even want to bother with the postage. When a group like Rescue Michigan says, here, just click this link, give us your name, email, and zip code, and we'll send it in for you. Makes the job a lot easier. But here's the actual truth about contacting your politicians. When a politician gets that nice handwritten letter from a constituent, and they open up and read it and says, please vote no on this, whatever. What do you think the politician's reaction to that is? One angry constituent. Yep. What happens when they get a stack of 100 postcards from the district? That's 100 angry constituents. Actually, something more than 100 angry constituents. It's 100 angry constituents with an organization behind them. An organization with a list. An organization with a list that might remind that list how they voted in the next election cycle if they don't do the thing the constituent asks. Those form letters are actually more effective than the handwritten letters because they're easy to send, because they show there's organizational backing. When politicians say, I only read handwritten letters, that's to get you to stop sending letters. That's to get you to stop contacting them. That's to avoid having to reply to you. That's to avoid having their staff's time spent responding to you instead of hobnobbing with the lobbyists. That's one of those big lies in politics. But here's one of the other things about these petitions. No matter how many letters you send, no matter how many people sign it, they don't really care anyway. Their mind's made up. They're going to do what the lobbyists want. Money is all that matters in politics. You guys have all heard that one before, I'll bet. Well, money does matter in politics. But money is a means to an end. In the political realm, politics to a politician is pain and pleasure. And money is just the primary source of pleasure for them. Pleasure are things that lead to their re-election. Pleasure is things that lead them to get to higher office. Pleasure is power, good committee assignments, the ability to control the rules, all those things. They like all those things. Pain is the opposite of all those things. Pain is loss of volunteers, loss of money, bad press, loss of influence. You all know who Steve Marino is by any chance? You guys heard the news story about him? Macomb County lawmaker. He's in some pain right now. Yeah. If I have time, I might talk about that more. But anyway, politicians actually all live in constant fear of their constituents. What they want you to think is that they don't. But here's the reality. If they're in a swing district, they are scared to death of losing any substantial constituency because they could lose their seat. And if they're in a safe seat, which many of them are, because that's the way the districts are drawn, they are still scared of losing majority. Or if they're on the other side of they want to get majority. That's all they talk about, the majority. When I first got to Lansing, first thing Chief of Staff says to the whole room of us is, may you never know what it's like to work in the minority. And I'm sure that's true. It's got to be horrible. But how does that happen? If you think, oh, it's all the lobbyists doing, well, look at Michigan. We've had seats go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth over the years. Last election cycle, we picked up 2 House seats and lost 2 others. We've had bad years, we've had good years. We had a terrible year in 2018. Had a great year in 2016. These seats are in play. Some seats are in play. And when politicians find out they're going to make large numbers of voters very angry, doing something very unpopular, they actually do react. But they only will if they know in advance before they do the dumb thing that they have a chance not to do it. There was the case with, what was that one? Senate Bill 250. Someone at the phone remind me. It's not an election bill, it was something else, but it was some really dumb bill that it slid right through the Senate, and then we lit up the members in the House. Is it still on? Oh, did I knock it off? You hear me?
No. Push the button all the way up.
All the way up? Oh, okay, all right. Sorry. Anyway. Everyone look up what Senate Bill 250 was? Huh?
It went off again.
It's now definitely all the way up. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. All right, I'll just keep talking then. What's Senate Bill 250? Y'all have smartphones, don't you? Yeah. Mine's at the table, otherwise I'd look it up right now. Anyway, some dumb bill. We lit up in the House after it passed the Senate, died in the House instantly. Went through the Senate with every Republican voting yes.
Something to do with restrictions on food service establishments and...
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Yes. So what it was a bill that was going to say, based on the percentage of positive tests on COVID-19, we're going to decide how much restaurants can serve people. And if it's above this number, they can't serve anybody. If it's below this number, you can have 25%, and so on down the line. The Michigan Restaurants Association thought that was a good idea.
It was or was not good?
They wanted it. They pushed for it. And we're like, you guys are crazy. What you're doing is giving Republicans ownership of the lockdowns. At the time the bill passed the Senate, under where we were on the positive test rates, they would have locked down every restaurant in Michigan completely. 0% capacity. Worse than the governor had it. So we actually managed to stop them from making a really stupid, serious policy error by lighting them up and sending in those phone calls and emails. So those things really do work. But here's another thing that's so good about petitions. And whether that's an informal petition to your legislator or a formal petition like Unlock Part 2, great petition, very important to do. It lets you connect to people that think the way that you do. If you go out knocking on doors to collect signatures for Unlock Michigan Part 2, you will identify neighbors who feel the same way you do. Neighbors that, is this what you're looking for? Neighbors that might be Trump voters. Here's the reality about that. I live in the most liberal county in Michigan, Washtenaw County. My county went 75% to Joe Biden, according to official results. And they weren't that off. I'll come back to talking about that in a bit. How am I doing on time, by the way? 21 minutes, good. I got some time. I want to make sure I don't leave any stories on the table, although I'm sure I will anyway. My county went 25% for Trump. You know what that means, though? It means there were 50,000 Trump voters in my county. They are out there. They are everywhere. And you know, Washtenaw is liberal. My township's not. I handed out about 300 flyers year before last to start a MAGA meetup for Trump supporters in my precinct. And I live in a very rural precinct, so that meant driving from one door to the next to drop off a flyer saying, let's meet at this restaurant on this date and time, talk about what we can do to support President Trump. Handed out 300 of those things, took about 2 afternoons to do. We had the meeting, 30 people showed up, including my township supervisor and township clerk. Made 30 new friends that day. In one precinct. In one precinct. There's so many things you want to all worry about, and I want to worry about. I'm sad to hear about Canada's election, sad to hear about California's election. I can't control what happens in those places. But we can control what happens in our own communities and in our own backyards. And if enough people around Michigan are doing these things, we can control what happens statewide. Because the end game is evicting these people from power that have enacted the most radical destruction of civil liberties in our state's history. And the only way that's going to happen, is doing that kind of shoe leather work. And in fact, this is all classic political technology. Going back, we have a book published. If you go to rescuemichigan.com, you can sign up. You can actually get one of the things that we have that no one else has. We have precinct voter files for every precinct in Michigan. And not just the ones that you can buy for 20 bucks from the Secretary of State. We have it enhanced from data brokers. They've got party affiliation, they've got phone numbers, vote history, donor history, demographic information, issue affinity scores, all this kind of stuff. You can get it for any precinct in Michigan for 35 bucks. And this data lets you go to just the people that we know. Oh, I'm going to first hit every Trump donor in my precinct. They don't hit every other Republican donor. They don't hit the ones that have a GOP score of 100 and vote in lots of elections. And you know exactly who to talk to. You can build an organization. One of the other things we have on the site you get for that same thing is there's a book someone gave me. It was published in 1962 called the Precinct Action Course. And all of its techniques were actually derived from Abraham Lincoln. It's called the Abe Lincoln 4-step. Step number 1, make a perfect list of every voter in the precinct. Step number 2, identify the affiliation of every voter in the precinct. Who's on one side, who's on the other side, and who's undecided. Step number 3 is have those who are in play, as we say, talked to by those with whom they have the most trust. And then step 4 is, as Abe Lincoln would say, make sure every Whig gets to the polls on election day. And these same tactics are still, to this day, the most effective. The name of the game in any election is, number 1, turnout. Making sure that our side does not fail to vote, and if possible, maybe depressing turnout for the other side a little bit. And then, of course, the other thing is persuading the people who are on the fence. And all of this involves the kind of stuff that nobody really wants to do. And this is where I think we try to distinguish ourselves from some of the other groups out there. We really don't organize rallies. We don't organize documentary movie watchings and teach-ins and things like that. Education is not what's going to save our country. Education actually does not even work if you get down to it. And there's a few reasons why that is. Reason number 1, first of all, the other side's doing all their educating too. It's not like you can just educate people in a vacuum. I'll show you my fact sheet on vaccines and I'm sure they'll persuade anyone that reads it. No, the other side's reaching out the same exact way. Oh, you can just turn that off, thank you. Just swipe it. That was my alarm telling me Tucker Carlson's on. Second problem with the education theory is most of the people you're talking to don't want to be educated and not by you. How many people, by show of hands, have friends and family who for the life of them you cannot get to see things your way in politics? If your hand's not raised, you don't have any friends or family. People tend to actually form their opinions socially, not intellectually. Or even if it's in a classroom, it's because they've psychologically invested in their professor, their teacher. This is a person I should listen to. They're telling me something. Doesn't work that way around the dinner table. It works from life experiences, maybe. We all got here through some process of education. But, handing someone a fact sheet, or God forbid, a DVD, is not going to change their minds. Third problem is even if it does, public opinion does not determine public policy. If public opinion determined public policy, first of all, bad news, guns would all be banned. On the other hand, right to work would be law of the land in all 50 states. But it doesn't. Politicians, not public opinion, make the policy. And that's not just from a majority of people having an idea. It's from, number 1, the politician himself, but also from the campaigns, who actually turns out and votes in an election, whose votes are in play, and who are the candidates. That's a big thing that matters too. Here's one thing education will never do. It won't find good candidates. When I went out and handed out those 300 invitations, there was one house in my precinct. It was the largest house in my precinct. It was a gigantic mansion. Guy wasn't home. But a couple weeks later, I came back with an Unlock Michigan petition for people to sign. And I knocked on his door. he was home. Thought he was going to be a Scrooge McDuck character, but no, he was in his mid-40s. I think he was Marine Corps. Had great candidate written all over him. Turns out actually his brother was a township trustee. But the kind of person that makes a great candidate has to have a lot of features. Number one, they have to actually be conservative, grounded in constitutional principles. Number two, they have to have the ability to run for office. They have to have the charisma to run for office. They have to have the health to run for office. So you can't knock on doors if you got bad knees. You know, so there's not a lot of people that actually fit this profile. They're hard to find. You can knock on doors and you might find the right people. And that voter list I was talking about might help you find those right people. But just holding an educational event and you're just listening to me as I'm going through a slideshow, it's not going to lead to any real political consequences of any kind. So, for all these reasons, education is not the key. The key is organization, confrontation, and mobilization. That means getting an organization together wherever you are. No excuses. I can't knock on doors. Call a friend. You can be their driver. I live in a rural area. So do I. I had to drive into every driveway. I live in a liberal district. So do I. There are Trump supporters everywhere. Want to avoid Democrats? Get one of our voter files and you can screen them off your list. There are Trump supporters everywhere, and they're waiting for someone to engage them in the real world. Part of the reason why Democrats were so effective in the last election with the lockdowns wasn't just the tyranny of destroying small businesses, wasn't just the tyranny of destroying, the public education system. It was destroying communities, that people don't get together in the real world anymore. And that's something we have to take back aggressively. And that means knocking on doors. And by the way, I can tell from experience, people don't freak out when you knock on their door. Knock and then take a step or two back so you don't look like, but that was a good principle before COVID. But yeah, I mean, the occasional Branch Covidian's a hardcore Democrat anyway. They don't matter. That's what we call negative response. We get nasty emails sometimes that don't care. What matters is the positive response. And you're not going to get a positive response if you never go out. But there are people everywhere that can grow an organization. And when I worked for Rep. Riley, we actually built a really good model for this, which is we have what we call high-frequency, low-maintenance meetings. What that would mean is not have a big production meeting every month, and no offense, this is a great crowd, I love it. But the problem you have with these kind of formats is if someone misses a month, which life happens, they're out of touch with the group for 2 months. The other problem is there's a lot of time and money that gets spent into doing events like that. You're bringing a speaker, there's a lot of work that goes into it. So we made a model that's, it's more like AA, frankly. You meet once a week, you meet for 1 hour, no more, and we always say half the time is just member sharing, socialization, talk about what's on your mind, and then 30 minutes is some kind of action step. Signing in a postcard campaign for a legislative item, or promoting, some kind of thing that they're doing or talking about an issue. So every week, one member just comes up with some program. So half-hour socialization, which is important. You have to have socialization, and a half hour of just a quick chat on some important political topic. And these days, there is something happening every single week to talk about and address. So it's worked fantastically. I mean, he has literally 100 people coming to his meetings weekly in a township of 8 precincts. And you got a dozen people in one precinct, you can do immense things to change the result of an election in one precinct. So these are some of the things that we talk about a lot at Rescue Michigan. It's really about grassroots leadership and empowerment. I live, one of the things we were talking about earlier this year, and it's a case I've been involved with very intensely. Terrible story. A student at Lake Superior State University, actually one of John Riley's constituents, because he's from Oakland Township, is facing a 20-year felony charge for joking about a lawfully purchased rifle and saying it's going to melt some snowflakes, huh? And a snowflake at his college called the police on him, and he was charged by a lunatic prosecutor for making a terrorist threat. Now, we're doing all we can for him on that case. Legislatively and politically, I've helped him raise a lot of money. Not enough. You wouldn't believe how much, well, maybe you would, how much legal defense costs. But I want someone to challenge that prosecutor in the next election. I want someone to challenge that judge in the next election. And I can't control what happens in Sault Ste. Marie. They're 300 miles north of me. All I can do is put ideas out in the ether about how you guys organize locally, because Once you do and you start getting the people you need to follow local politics, you'll realize there are problems like that happening everywhere. Everywhere. And that's why they say all politics is local, because all we can do is recruit the candidates that will hopefully rise to the higher offices, do our part where we can do things effectively. And people, when they want to be effective and maybe not educate, the other pitfall they get into, someone says, I want to be effective, how I want to get engaged, what do I do? Someone will say, well, talk to a local campaign, get involved with the campaign. Well, here's what happens there. First of all, most campaigns have no idea what to do with you. They'll probably have you stuff envelopes, or they'll have you maybe go out and knock on doors, and they'll give you this stupid app on your phone. Have you guys used this app before? They have multiple names, but they're all the same. And they tell you to go to a door, knock on the door, read a script from your phone. Hello, ma'am, are you voting for Donald Trump? Slam, you know. It's a wooden script, it's not natural. People don't like it. People hate seeing canvassers using their phones. When they close the door, they see the person through their window, walking on the driveway, typing in data in their phone. They hate that. And I hate it too, because when I go out knocking on doors, first of all, besides the voters, oftentimes the house will tell me a lot of things about it. You see American flag on a flagpole, or even better, a Gadsden flag. You'll see religious imagery in the yard. Sometimes you'll see important things that people don't think about. Kids' toys in the yard means you're going to care about education. Yeah. A boat, camper, all these things tell me things about voters that I want to put into the thing, but it doesn't give me an option to. But the worst thing about it is you get home from helping on a campaign, and you've punched in your data, and what have you got? Nothing. The campaign got something which they probably won't even know how to use, but you'll have nothing. And if you're canvassing your own precinct with your own voter file that we give you ownership of, you can go back to those people for a school board election, or a state rep election, or a millage, or whatever else it is. You can build a local organization where you actually have ownership of the data. Plus, by the way, I did a campaign once where we actually gave our volunteers a choice, ink and paper list versus those stupid apps. Literally every volunteer chose the ink and paper list. No one likes them. Yeah, you gotta type in the data on the computer when you get home. But oftentimes in a campaign, you'll have a volunteer who won't knock on doors, but will do that for you. Just do data entry. So, anyway. Grassroots leadership. We'll talk about the issues. Got a few minutes left. I do want to go back to talking about rigorousness, though, in Mike Lindell, because occasionally we get into some hot water with some fellow grassroots groups, and I don't like to start drama. But I do want to make a point here. I was watching Mike Lindell's movie, his first movie, and there is this part in the fourth quarter of it where it's got these numbers flashing across the screen. And this is where Mike Lindell said, "Now the moment you've all been waiting for, folks, the absolute proof." And he brings on this woman. You can't see her, but she's identified. Her name's Mary Fanning. Says she's an intelligence analyst, no credentials. And they show these fancy-looking maps on the screen, although they're Google Maps. And then these charts start flying by, saying, here's exactly how many votes these hackers were stealing from Donald Trump in all these counties all across America. And I hit the pause button. And I look at one of the counties. Mackinac County, Michigan says 22,765 votes stolen from Donald Trump and given to Joe Biden in Mackinac County. There aren't even close to 22,765 votes in Mackinac County, folks. That's St. Ignace. And look at another one. Similar number, Calhoun County, Battle Creek. It'd be possible if Trump actually got 94% of the vote in that county, which, look, folks, Trump's popular. He's not that popular. This is where I get to talking about the responsibility you have. If you're making a movie that's going to be seen by millions of people, you have a duty to check your facts, because people will go out and repeat things that you say that trust you. And going back to what I was saying in the beginning about I won't say delusion on our part, but the desire of people to believe everything they want to believe. And I talked about the fraud that we saw firsthand in the election, the impeding of poll challengers, the controlling of poll workers, the absolutely illegal refusal to verify signatures on absentee ballots. All of these things are huge sources for vote fraud. I mean, in fact, the poll worker training told us Number one thing they're going to challenge is absentee ballots, and that's where they want to stop the poll challengers from getting involved, is the absentee ballots. And by the way, the history of absentee ballots is that the signature check has been used aggressively by both parties, and especially Democrats, all over America for decades. It was used by a young man running for state senate in Illinois to disqualify all 4 of his opponents from the ballot. That's how he got to the state senate. His name was Barack Obama. It was used to great effect to disqualify a young black man, his name's not so young, from the ballot in, I think, at least Illinois and Virginia and maybe elsewhere, Kanye West. They challenged his signatures. And both parties have used signature challenges to kick third parties off the ballot for years and years and years. That's the precedent. And the basis for it, for having a signature match on absentee ballots, is it's the only way that we even verify the ballot actually came from the person that it was issued to. Jocelyn Benton said we're going to presume every signature is valid. Well, 2/3 of the Democrats voted absentee. If 5% of those signatures were invalid, that's the margin of victory for Trump in Michigan. Alone. That's it.
That's right.
And the legal standard is supposed to be that if the number of questionable ballots that cannot be verified exceeds the margin, that's supposed to invalidate the whole election. That was a standard that Democrats have used in many elections over the years. Of course, the courts aren't hearing any of that. But here's my point. The evidence that we need is already here. We have them on tape saying they're going to impede poll challengers. We have a Court of Claims decision saying that most of the ballots in Michigan were processed illegally. But everyone wants to think it's more than that. They want to think Trump won California. Sorry, friends, I have family in California. Trump didn't win California. There is some vote fraud. There's some vote fraud every election, and there was more than ever in the last one. But it only can go so far, because there are enough voters out there. Also, by the way, there's lots of election workers too. Like, to hack an election, it's hard when there's paper ballots, because you never know where the paper ballots might be recounted. In Michigan, they were recounted in Eaton County. They didn't mismatch. When John Riley had his recount in 2016, the machines counted those ballots absolutely perfectly. The only discrepancies were for things the machine couldn't catch, like an X over a bubble or something like that. There are ways to steal votes, but when people go out and they say the results are absolutely not remotely what people think they are, and they all changed it through electronic manipulation, we've got this evidence that doesn't actually make any sense. It does a couple of things. One, it hurts our case, making the weakest arguments into the strongest arguments, gives the other side ammunition. And it also contributes to the people who are going to say, why bother next time? We haven't fixed our election system enough, so why should I go out knocking on doors for Trump in 2024 when they're going to rig it anyway? It's a self-serving attitude. The fact is, yes, there is vote fraud, but it can only go so far. I mean, campaigns have pollsters. We do polls. We do polls. Trump's team did polls. Rasmussen did polls. Yeah, the mass media polls are manipulated. Yeah, push polls are all dishonest. But campaigns do their own polls. They know a ballpark of where they're going to perform it. And they're going to steal some votes, but they're not going to steal an entire ballpark's worth. So it's important to be rigorous. So Rescue Michigan, we have been pushing since the beginning to address all these issues. In fact, we've got 7 bills introduced in the State House addressing some of these. I think we're the only group in the country that actually put out a proposal for how to correct the partisan manipulation of the poll workers. Because that's a huge problem that we have in Detroit. They're controlling who works there. So, and I don't think I have time to go through. In fact, I'm about out of time, so I don't have time to go through all those bills. But if you go to rescuemichigan.com, there's tons and tons and tons of info on there. So I'm going to wrap up now. I know I'm going to wrap up.
Because we want questions.
I'm happy to answer. I got all night, so I'll stay as long as you guys have questions. Maybe the country club does it. Yeah. But I would just say this. The most effective things are the things that people are least inclined to do, but nobody else is going to do them. The success we'll have next year is going to depend on how many people are going to put down their keyboards and do the shoe leather work. and do the knocking on doors. And also to get out of your own element and into the element of listening to each voter. Because I know what I like to talk about. When you talk to the voter, it's all about them. It's not about you. It's about winning them over, whatever it takes. And that does not mean indulging everything that you don't want to say, or that you do want to say but can't, to a total stranger. It's about being an ambassador for liberty in your own precinct.
That's right.
So at Rescue Michigan, our main focus is on helping grassroots leaders to be more effective. So if you go to rescuemichigan.com, you can get these voter files. There's video after video of tools and training, and we also talk about current events and legislation. Plenty of petitions to sign. They're back in legislative session for the next several weeks, and there's a lot to do to save our representatives from themselves. So with that, I'm happy to open up for any questions. And again, thank you all for having me tonight. I appreciate the time.
We've got a lot of really good questions, but this first question, I want you to respond, and then I have something I want to say about it.
Sure.
Why don't you, it's easier if you just read it.
All right, so it's a great job, thank you. I live in Bloomfield Hills. I am considering running for school board. 4 seats are up for re-election. We need all 4. Do you recommend running as a slate? Good question. As a slate, often yes. Slate can often be effective, especially on school board. And especially also for districts where you have a huge area and it's a low interest race, like for example, an at-large city council race in a big city. And also if you're trying to replace the entire school board, maybe not so much. But if you have like an incumbent and you run with it as a slate with them, their endorsement can go a long way. Yeah, it's situational because it also depends who the other candidates are. Because you'll be liable for their mistakes and vice versa. So if they're doing a really strong campaign and you run as a slate and you're magnifying your efforts by having multiple people covering multiple precincts, sometimes that can make sense. But it really is situational. Depends on who the other candidates are, depends on who the opponents are. Yeah, I mean, I could talk for hours about how to run an effective campaign. And I'll make sure you guys get my contact info if you want to ask these questions in more depth later on, too. Oh, yeah.
I just want to make one comment. I mentioned the resources tab. There's a whole section on there for candidates and perspectives. Gives you all the access to where to go, and also a link to 1776 Project Path, which has been set up specifically to help candidates for school board elections. So go to that tab and note that information.
Okay. Okay. Next question is, what suggestions do you have to constituents to put pressure on Mike Shirkey, who is term limited? Okay, in Shirkey's case, you put pressure on his caucus. When I was saying earlier about how people who are in safe districts still care so much about the majority, when you have leadership, you have people their caucus is their constituency. And Shirkey's #1 job is to ensure the Republicans keep the majority in the next cycle. So you want to pressure Mike Shirkey, pressure your senators, and especially pressure your most vulnerable senators. So obviously always you try to go locally, but sometimes you target the ones in the tough seats. They're the ones where the pain is felt most intensely. Other than that, with term limits though, honestly, often you can't. That is a downside of term limits. And it's a mixed bag. There's good things about term limits, but if they're not running for higher office and they're termed out, they don't have to follow what you're saying because there's nothing you can do about it. That's just the way it goes. And that's a real problem in the Senate because they only have 2 terms. So in the second term, unless they're running for governor or something, that whole second term, they're not vulnerable to grassroots pressure. And in lame duck, none of them are, because they're all either retiring in 2 months or they're just won their second term. So that's the downside of term limits. It's just the way it is. Is Rescue Michigan doing? Did you want to answer the question first? I've got a whole pile of cards already. All right. Form letters. How to find current issues to send letters. Current letters to send in to representatives. Well, first of all, a lot of groups run their own petitions. For example, if your issue is gun rights, go to the National Association for Gun Rights, sign up. Make sure you get emails from Great Lakes Gun Rights. Same thing with pro-life organizations. Rescue Michigan has several active petitions running that if you sign up on our website, you'll get those emails. Also, if you sign up for your voter file at Rescue Michigan, you can actually create your own petitions. And when people sign those petitions that you promote on the internet, you'll actually capture their email addresses so that you can send them follow-up letters about what's going on with your issue. And you can use that to grow your own local organization. So that's a tool we've made available, and I hope you guys use it. Let's see here. What does Republican Party need to do this midterm election besides money to take the House and Senate? I believe the Republicans need to start talking and fight back. Money will not win. More needs to be done. Well, the thing to keep in mind right now is the candidate filing deadline. And you need to keep up with who is running. There is a Michigan Campaign Finance website, cfrsearch.nitcusa.com. I'll send you guys the link so you can send it out to the list. It's the Michigan Campaign Finance searchable database, which besides looking up campaign finance records, also gives you the candidate list of who's filed. So you can just put in state rep, District 97, Republican, see who is actually filed. Start vetting them early. And if they're not to your satisfaction or there's something wrong with them, try to find someone else. You have until April to file to run for office. And by the way, with redistricting, we don't even know who's going to be in what district yet. So recruit as many people as you can. The biggest challenge the Republican Party always has is finding quality candidates. Democrats don't have this problem. Democrats recruit candidates in every seat. It doesn't matter if it's a safe Republican seat. They will run everybody everywhere.
That's right.
Republicans give up too easily. But you have to remember, these districts like Westland, I was helping a candidate who's running for state rep in that seat, even though it's hopelessly Democrat. But you know what? If she's bringing out turnout in Westland for her Republican seat that she's not going to win, she's also bringing out votes for Trump. So you want people running everywhere, even if you think it's hopeless. Because they're ultimately, in running, doing important work. They're still organizing people, they're still mobilizing, they're still bringing out the issues, and they're ultimately helping out the ballot tickets. Oh, yeah.
And I want to comment on that last one. Also watch the Bloomfield RWC website. Up at the tab section, we will be adding a tab for all candidates who are running for all statewide that we can vote for, and all municipalities, school boards, etc. Can't get all on the list now because of the redistricting, but we've already got all the lists for governors and everything, and look to see that in the next couple weeks so we can stay on top of these candidates. And just a quick question that relates to your whole presentation. How many precinct delegates are in the office? Okay. We have more that will probably become precinct delegates, but we've learned a lot about what we need to do.
Good, good. And by the way, just to clarify about precinct delegates, politicians often suggest if you want to volunteer and be a precinct captain, you got to become a precinct delegate. Now, that's actually not what being a precinct delegate means. If you want to be a precinct captain, if you want to work your precinct, you want to get people out to vote for the Republican slate, they'll be happy to have you as a volunteer.
Yeah, that's right.
But being a precinct delegate means winning a precinct-wide local election that gives you standing to vote at your county Republican convention. And that's important too, because some counties have real quality control problems with their county GOP. And also, they are the ones who elect the state delegates who nominate the candidates for Attorney General, for Secretary of State, for university boards, and for other positions too. I've got more questions going.
Yeah.
You're giving me more questions than I'm answering at a time here. Okay, I've got another 4 here too. All right, how can I get yard signs made? They're giving me several suggestions for yard signs here. I have a guy who has great prices on yard signs. In fact, I'll quote you. Oh no, my phone's on the table. But I think it's like $4 a sign for $250, including stakes. He's local from Sterling Heights, does great work. Bends over backwards with customer service. Also, my flyer guy does great work, and my mail guy. His name's Dave Kursky. So I'll pass the information on. If you guys don't get this from me later on, make sure you follow up with them so that I remember to get this out to them. But hopefully the video will remind me.
If you send it to me, I'll get it.
Yeah. I've got vendors. I need vendors. Question: why not give driver's licenses to illegals so we know who they are and their address? Well, because I don't think we should condone illegality, and because of the stepping stone to giving them voting papers, and welfare and everything else. Is Rescue Michigan doing anything about the voting machines for mail-in ballots? Some of the bills that we have that we've proposed The biggest thing, I think, well, number one, as far as the voting machines go, we do have a bill that just says these machines cannot connect to the internet, period. They have no reason to, and you're right, they do. They say they don't, they absolutely do. Where I worked in Detroit, they connected the machine to the internet at the end of the night. They had a portable modem you plugged in, connected to the Wayne County Board of or the receiving board, to report the results. Failed 8 times to connect to the Detroit receiving board, so a lot of good of you did anyway. But, you know, you can build an app on a phone to punch in the results if that's all they're doing. The only reason they have these, they claim, is just to report the results at the end of the night.
It's not true.
Huh?
It's not true.
What?
That's not true why they have.
Oh, that's what they say. But anyway, I maintain my skepticism about the electronic manipulation because they have recounts and they have paper ballots. And if you're going to rig an election electronically, if you're not also somehow doing the same thing with the paper ballots to match the electronic receipts,
That's right.
then it's going to get found out somewhere. Although we also had another bill we put in to say county parties should be able to have a spot check. They should be able to request one recount in one race in anywhere in one county, so that any hacker can't know where they would be able to would be able to know where they could, or where they would not be manipulating the results. Anyway, real quick though about voting machines for mail-in ballots. One of the biggest problems we have with the mail-in ballots is signature verification. The voting machines themselves, they're just tabulators. The main problem is that before the challengers are there, before the watchers are there, behind closed doors, the election officials are verifying signatures, and of course they were directed not to. You want me to answer that one? Okay. All right, what else do I have here? I'm trying to go quick because I get a lot of questions. You said congressional leaders, congressional leaders is how we make effective change. Not congressional leaders, although having good people in office is important. But in politics, leaders come last. Politicians are mostly the last people to understand what the public wants, and judges are even worse. What is going to change the country is the grassroots organization. When the grassroots are at a threshold amount, the politicians can no longer ignore them. They ignore us now because there's not enough of us. What has a United States Congress done or passed for the American people, Democrat or Republican lately? I can't think of anything. And if I had more time, I'd tell you some stories about what I saw going on in Washington. The best they ever do is lessen bad things they've already done in the past.
Don't go to work anymore.
Yeah, really.
They told us that that's the most effective way to do something. So I asked the question, what have they done? What have they passed? If that's the best way for us to affect change, they have done nothing in this country.
Oh yeah. I'd be happy to commiserate. They're awful. It's a really bad process, but they will be better if we are better. And the problem that we have is that, and this is a great group of people. How many people here live in Bloomfield? Okay, so that's about 30 people in a township of, what, 20 precincts, 30 precincts? So, okay, so, you know, about 1 or 2 people in a precinct. You get to 10, it's a different story. Heard on Tucker, there is a plan within the infrastructure bill that the government can receive/get masses money info by obtaining how much one has in savings checking accounts. Also, government will know where you go and where you spend your money on, etc. And another way of power and control of the Democrat Party. We heard this. Maybe, you know, again, this is where, before I report on it, I would do a lot of checking to make sure. And we are only so far focused on state legislation, honestly. Federal legislation, and again, I wish I could tell you some more stories about how goofy things go in Congress. But there are some good federal organizations like Judicial Watch, Campaign for Liberty, and a few others that are focusing more closely on federal legislation. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. There's all kinds of things they're trying to do now that are grossly unconstitutional and might get repealed in the court of law, but also might not. So, no, I mean, there's no sugarcoating it, folks. I mean, we're in a free fall. The very most basic fabric of our society is being destroyed day by day.
On purpose.
Yeah, I mean, the notion that you can commit treason and nothing happens is unbelievable. And not the first time I've seen this kind of stuff too. In fact, I will tell you one short story. Actually, never mind. No, it's not. You know what? It's not short. Okay, all right. I'll tell you what. Yeah, there's a couple of questions left, and they look long, so I'll close with my last story. I was working for Benevolio. My background's in computers. Remember the Obamacare website when that came out?
Yeah.
And the big story was it didn't work right. Well, the bigger story that was not in the news at all was it was also extremely insecure. And there was actually a committee in the House Science Committee hearing, House Science Committee had a hearing, and all their experts that they brought in the Congress, the minority gets to bring in a witness, but all four of them, the House minority and majority witnesses, all said this system is absolutely not the least bit secure. It's vulnerable to injection attacks, which if I had more time to explain what those are, but they're computer science 101. This is a system that talks to state medical records, private medical records, immigration records, homeland security records, and they say, yeah, I heard from hackers who said, like, I can't testify because the FBI will come after me, but everyone can break into this thing. So we did a bill on it to say the GAO had to audit the whole website code, and we got a good number of co-sponsors on it. The committee chair says he's talking to the minority vice chair in the committee, Gerald Connolly, and he thinks that rather than have the GAO do the audit, let's have the Department of Health and Human Services do the audit, or whatever it is, CMS I think it was, that actually made the source code. We're like, no, that's an executive agency. It'll be a whitewash. It'll destroy the whole purpose of the bill. Well, that's what they want to do because GAO doesn't want to do it, and it'll make it bipartisan. I'm like, you guys are crazy. This is a story of the American. If the Republicans had any brains, they'd be screaming the story from the rafters that Russia and China have all of our medical records now because Obama did this. Well, yeah, well, we don't want that story to come out, and and then all these excuses. This is around the time I left Benevolio's office. Anyway, they amended the bill, passed the House, died in the Senate. The end. All your medical records through probably 2013, Russia and China have, and whoever else was hacking around there that time. But anyway, no one ever heard about that. And that's the way it works in Washington. If you're not in the arena, the minute I left Washington, I never heard much of anything that was going on in Congress ever since. It's, I only just recently left Lansing, so I'm still tracking stuff in Lansing. And at least in Lansing, it's manageable how much stuff you can follow. Congress, you need a whole army of people to keep track of what Congress is doing. And the legislation is much longer, much more convoluted. And yeah, it's a terrible mess. So. On that note, go out there, knock on some doors, make some new friends, and bring some new people in. Because an organization that's not growing is dying. And right now, there's never been a better time to recruit and bring in more and more people into an organization. And have one. We want to have one in every city and every township in Michigan. Countywide, too big. Too big.
What about the Constitution of States? Is there any recourse there, anything that we can do
No.
as a small group?
I think the Constitution of States is the most dangerous idea out there, frankly. Knowing what you know about the judiciary, knowing what you know about the media, knowing what you know about the political elites. Do you trust them to restrain themselves in a constitutional convention? I don't, not for a second. And I've seen both sides going back and forth, and they have lawyers saying, oh, there's no way they could possibly do this. If we had a constitutional convention, it'd be the biggest thing since the last constitutional convention. And by the way, the last constitutional convention of 1787, that was to create a powerful federal government to take away the states' rights, which they said it wasn't, but then it was. So, and you can argue back and forth about that and whether or not that was good for history or not, but that's what happened. They called a convention just to make some little tweaks here and there, ended up throwing out the Articles of Confederation and creating ultimately the Constitution is powerless to prevent the government that we have today. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. So if you want to agree with me. Oh, it's just the Rescue Michigan channel. It's on YouTube and it's on Rumble.
Yeah, the Slate resources website.
There you go.
It's good.
Hey, thanks, appreciate it. All right, well, thanks, folks. I'll stay and hang out for a little bit. In the meantime, if I didn't get to your questions, I'm sorry, but they're trying to usher me out here. So. But keep in touch. Go to rescuemichigan.com, sign up, and yeah, get your voter files, guys. Appreciate it.